The moment I saw my car in someone else's hands, I realized my marriage had already ended. I just hadn't accepted it yet. I remember exactly how the air felt that afternoon, heavy still, like something was about to break, even though I couldn't yet name what it was. People always say you sense betrayal before you see it, like your body knows before your mind catches up. And maybe that's true because for weeks, something inside me had been quietly unraveling. My name is Ashley Carter, I'm 32 years old, and until recently I believed I had a stable life. A decent job in marketing, a home in a quiet suburb just outside Chicago, and a husband I thought I understood. Ryan and I had been married for 6 years, long enough to build routines, shared habits, and that comfortable silence couples fall into when they think nothing can shake them. But looking back now, that silence wasn't comfort, it was distance. It started small. Ryan began coming home later than usual, offering simple explanations that didn't quite match the look in his eyes. He kept his phone face down on the table. He smiled less. Not in a dramatic way, not enough to start a fight, just enough to leave a quiet question hanging in the room. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself marriage had phases. But then there was the morning my car disappeared. It wasn't just any car. It was mine, fully paid off, something I had worked for years to afford on my own before we even got married. It represented something personal, something I had earned without anyone's help. When I walked out to the driveway and saw the empty space where it should have been, my first thought wasn't anger, it was confusion. I went back inside, keys still in my hand, and asked Ryan where it was. He didn't hesitate. "A friend needed it for a few days," he said casually, like it was nothing, like giving away something that mattered to me didn't require a conversation. A friend. That word stayed with me longer than it should have. I nodded in the moment because that's what I had trained myself to do. Keep the peace, don't escalate, don't assume the worst, but something inside me tightened. It wasn't just the car. It was the way he said it, like my opinion didn't matter, like I wasn't even part of the decision. And for the rest of that day, I couldn't focus on anything else. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that empty driveway. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was him correcting the story, saying it was temporary, saying he'd bring it back. But he didn't. And that was the moment everything shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a crack forming beneath the surface of something that once felt unbreakable. Because deep down I already knew. People don't give away things that belong to you unless they've already decided you don't matter as much anymore. I tried to act like it was not a big deal, like it was just a car and nothing more. But the truth was, it stayed in my head all day, quietly pulling at something deeper that I could not ignore anymore. At work, I stared at my computer screen for hours, rereading the same email over and over without understanding a single word, because all I could think about was that one sentence Ryan had said so easily. A friend needed it, like that explained everything. It should have made sense, it should have been enough, but it was not. There was something about the way he said it, something too smooth, too quick, like he had already rehearsed it in his mind before I even asked. And that thought did not sit right with me. Around 3 in the afternoon, I finally gave up pretending to work and stepped outside the office building, letting the cold air hit my face, hoping it would clear my mind, but it only made everything sharper. That was when I did something I had never done before in our marriage. I opened the location app connected to my car. I had set it up years ago for safety, something practical, something responsible, never thinking I would actually use it like this. My hands hesitated for a moment before tapping the screen, like I already knew crossing that line would change something. But I did it anyway. The map loaded slowly, each second stretching longer than it should have, until finally, a small blue dot appeared. My car was not far, maybe 20 minutes away, parked somewhere I did not recognize. Not near any of Ryan's friends that I knew, not near his office, not anywhere that made sense. I zoomed in, studying the streets, the nearby buildings, trying to find a logical explanation. But the more I looked, the less it felt like a simple favor. It felt intentional. I told myself I was overreacting again, that there could still be a reasonable answer, but that quiet voice inside me had grown louder now, and it was no longer asking questions. It was warning me. By the time I got back to my desk, I had already made up my mind. I was going to see it for myself. The drive felt longer than it actually was, even though it was less than 10 miles, because every traffic light, every turn, gave my mind more time to imagine possibilities I did not want to believe. When I finally pulled into the area where the location showed, I slowed down, my heart beating harder than it should have, scanning every parked car until I saw it. My car. Sitting there like nothing was wrong, like it had always belonged in that place. For a moment I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, telling myself to breathe, telling myself not to jump to conclusions. But then I saw something that made everything inside me go completely still. The driver's side door opened and a woman stepped out, casually, confidently, like she had done it 100 times before, like there was nothing unusual about her being there. And in that exact moment, without her even looking at me, without a single word being said, I knew this was not about a friend. Not even close. I did not move right away, I just sat there watching her like my body had forgotten how to react, because there was something about the way she carried herself that made everything feel wrong in a way I could not explain yet. She was not rushing, not looking around nervously like someone borrowing a car that was not theirs. She closed the door gently, adjusted her hair in the reflection of the window, and then smiled at her own reflection, like she belonged there, like everything about that moment was completely normal. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing, telling myself there still had to be an explanation, something simple, something I was missing, but that explanation never came. Instead she reached back into the car, grabbed a small bag from the passenger seat, and slung it over her shoulder with a kind of ease that only comes from familiarity. That was when my chest started to feel tight, because people do not act that comfortable with something they just borrowed for a few days. They act careful. They hesitate. They treat it like it does not belong to them. But she did not hesitate at all. She moved like it was hers. I felt my heartbeat pick up, louder now, harder, like my body was finally catching up to what my mind was trying to deny. I glanced down at the steering wheel again, my reflection faintly visible in the windshield, and for a second I did not recognize the person looking back at me. I looked tense, uncertain, like someone standing at the edge of a truth they were not ready to face. Then something shifted. The woman pulled out her phone, glanced at it briefly, and then looked up with a small smile that did not feel random, like she was expecting someone. And that was when I saw him. Ryan walked into view from the side of the building, casual, relaxed, like this was just another normal part of his day. He was not surprised to see her. He was not confused. He walked straight toward her like he knew exactly where she would be, like they had done this before. My stomach dropped so suddenly it felt physical, like something inside me had just fallen out of place. I watched as he reached her, and for a brief moment they stood close, talking in low voices I could not hear, but I did not need to hear them. It was in the way they looked at each other, the way there was no distance, no hesitation, no sense that anything about this was wrong. I had seen that look before. I had seen it years ago when Ryan used to look at me that way. And that was when the last piece of denial disappeared. This was not about a favor. This was not about a friend. This was something else entirely. My hand started to tremble slightly, but I did not look away. I could not. Because once you see something like that, once it becomes real in front of you, there is no going back to the version of the story you told yourself before. There is only the truth standing right in front of you, whether you are ready for it or not. I do not remember deciding to step out of the car, but suddenly I was already opening the door, my body moving before my thoughts could catch up, like something deeper had taken control. The air felt colder now, sharper against my skin as I walked toward them, each step steady but heavy, like I was walking into a version of my life I had never imagined. They had not noticed me yet. They were still standing close, still talking, still existing in a moment that clearly did not include me anymore. I slowed down just a few feet away, close enough to hear their voices now, soft and casual, like nothing about this situation required secrecy or urgency. That was what hurt the most. Not panic. Not guilt. Just normal conversation. Ryan was the first to see me. His expression changed instantly, like someone had flipped a switch, the calm disappearing from his face as his eyes locked onto mine. For a second he said nothing. The woman turned slightly, following his gaze, and that was when our eyes met for the first time. Up close, everything became clearer. She was confident, composed, not surprised in the way someone should be when confronted by a stranger in a situation like this. Instead, she looked at me with a quiet awareness, like she already knew exactly who I was. That realization hit harder than anything else so far. I stopped a few steps away, my hands at my sides, my heart beating so loud I could feel it in my chest, but my voice when it came was steady. "You said a friend needed the car," I said, looking directly at Ryan, not even glancing at her. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, like he was searching for the right version of the truth to give me. "Ashley, I can explain," he finally said, but his voice did not carry the confidence it usually did. It sounded thin, uncertain. I let out a small breath, not quite a laugh, not quite anything at all. "Then explain," I replied. There was a pause, just a second, but long enough to say everything. The woman shifted her weight slightly, adjusting the strap of her bag, still calm, still composed, like this moment was inconvenient but not unexpected. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, a habit I knew too well, something he always did when he was trying to manage a situation instead of being honest about it. "It is not what it looks like," he said. And that was when something inside me finally settled into clarity, because it looked exactly like what it was. I turned my head slightly and looked at the car, at the familiar shape that had once meant independence, security, something I had built for myself long before him. And now it was sitting here, part of something else entirely. "You gave her my car," I said quietly, more to myself than to him, letting the words exist out loud for the first time. He hesitated again, and that hesitation was the answer. Not borrowed. Not temporary. Not a misunderstanding. Given. The woman finally spoke, her voice calm, almost polite. "I did not realize this would be an issue," she said, like she was stepping into a conversation she had every right to be part of. I looked at her then, really looked at her, taking in the confidence, the ease, the complete lack of doubt in her place here. And in that moment, something inside me shifted completely. The confusion was gone. The questions were gone. All that remained was a quiet, steady understanding that whatever this was, it had already been happening long before I arrived. For a moment, no one said anything, and that silence felt louder than any argument we could have had. Like the truth had already filled the space between us and there was nothing left to explain. I looked at Ryan again, really looked at him this time, searching for something familiar, something that still connected him to the man I thought I married, but all I saw was someone trying to manage a situation he could no longer control. "You did not think this would be an issue?" I repeated slowly, turning back to the woman, my voice calm but heavier now, like every word carried weight I could not ignore. She held my gaze without flinching, her expression steady, almost measured, like she had already prepared herself for this moment. "Ryan said it was not a problem," she replied, and then she glanced at him. Briefly, not with uncertainty, but with expectation, like she was waiting for him to support what she just said. That single sentence said more than anything else could have. Ryan said it was not a problem. Not we discussed it. Not you agreed. Just him. I let that settle in my mind for a second, feeling the meaning behind it sink deeper than the words themselves. "Of course he did," I said quietly, almost to myself. Ryan took a step forward, his voice a little more urgent now. "Ashley, listen, I was going to tell you," he said, but the moment he said it, I knew it was not true. People who plan to tell the truth do not wait until they are caught. They do not build entire situations around silence. They do not hand over something that belongs to someone else and hope it will never be noticed. I shook my head slightly, not in anger but in disbelief. "When?" I asked, looking at him again. "When were you going to tell me?" He hesitated, and that hesitation stretched just long enough to confirm everything I already knew. There was no plan. There was no right time. There was only avoidance. I glanced back at the car again, the one thing in this entire situation that had always been simple, always been mine, and now it felt like a symbol of something much bigger than just a mistake. "Do you know what that car is to me?" I asked, my voice steady but quieter now. Ryan looked confused, like he did not understand why I was focusing on that instead of everything else happening around us. And that was exactly the problem. "It is not just a car," I continued. "It is something I built on my own. Something I paid for before you were even part of my life." The woman shifted slightly again, her expression changing just enough to show that she was starting to understand this was not as simple as she had been told. Ryan exhaled, running his hand through his hair again, frustration starting to replace uncertainty. "You are overreacting," he said, and the moment those words left his mouth, something inside me went completely still. Not louder, not more emotional, just still. Because there is a point where anger fades, where confusion disappears, and what replaces it is something much clearer. Something final. I looked at him for a long second, letting that sentence settle between us, letting it define exactly where we stood now. No, I said quietly. I am finally reacting to what has been happening this whole time. And for the first time since I stepped out of my car, I was not questioning anything anymore. I was not searching for explanations or hoping for a different version of the truth. I was seeing everything exactly as it was. Ryan looked at me like he was trying to figure out which version of me he was dealing with now, because I was no longer the one who stayed quiet to keep things calm, no longer the one who accepted half answers just to avoid conflict, and I could see that shift making him uncomfortable in a way he did not expect. Ashley, you are making this bigger than it is, he said. His tone more controlled now, like he was trying to bring the situation back into something he could manage, something familiar. But there was nothing familiar left about this. I let out a slow breath and turned slightly toward the car again, my eyes tracing every detail, the same way I had the day I bought it, the same way I had admired it when it first sat in my driveway, untouched, completely mine. Then explain it clearly, I said, not raising my voice, not rushing the words, just letting them land exactly where they needed to. Say it without changing anything. There was a pause, longer this time, heavier, like even he understood there was no version of this story that would sound better out loud. The woman crossed her arms loosely, her confidence still there but quieter now, like she was beginning to realize this was not just a misunderstanding she could stand outside of. Ryan glanced at her, then back at me, and in that brief exchange I saw something I had not noticed before. This was not new. This was not a sudden mistake or a moment of bad judgment. This had history. It is not like that, he said again, but even he seemed to realize how empty that sounded now. I shook my head slowly. Then what is it like? I asked. My voice did not crack. It did not rise. It stayed steady, and somehow that made everything feel even more serious. He exhaled sharply, frustration finally showing through the calm he had been trying to hold on to. I gave her the car because she needed it, he said, his words coming out faster now, less controlled. Her situation is complicated right now, and I was helping her. I let that sit for a second, repeating it silently in my mind. Helping her. I nodded once slowly like I was considering it, even though I already knew the answer. And what about me? I asked quietly. That question seemed to catch him off guard more than anything else I had said. He blinked like he had not expected me to ask something that simple, something that direct. What about you? He repeated, confused. I felt something tighten in my chest, not pain, not exactly, but something close to it. Did it ever cross your mind to ask me? I said. Or did you just decide that what belonged to me was yours to give away? He did not answer right away, and that silence felt heavier than anything else he could have said. The woman shifted again, her eyes moving between us now, no longer as steady as before, like she was starting to see the part of this she had not been told. Ryan looked away for a moment, then back at me, but there was no clear answer in his expression, no explanation that made sense. And that was when it became undeniable. This was never about helping someone. This was about choices. His choices. And for the first time I realized something that changed everything. This was not just about what he had done. It was about what he believed he could get away with. And standing there looking at both of them, I understood that if I walked away from this moment without saying anything, without drawing a line, then nothing about it would ever change. I did not raise my voice, I did not step closer, I did not need to do anything dramatic, because the moment had already reached its peak without any of that, and somehow that made everything feel even more intense. I looked at Ryan one last time, really looked at him, not as my husband, not as someone I once trusted, but as someone standing in front of me making choices that no longer included me in any meaningful way. Then, I turned slightly and walked toward the car, each step slow and deliberate, feeling both of them watching me now, unsure of what I was about to do but sensing that something had already shifted beyond repair. I reached the driver's side and ran my fingers lightly along the surface, the same way I had done the day I first brought it home, remembering how proud I felt, how independent, how certain I was about the life I was building for myself. For a brief second that memory almost pulled me back, almost made me hesitate, but then I remembered why I was standing here now, and that hesitation disappeared just as quickly as it came. I opened the door and sat inside, the familiar scent, the quiet hum of the interior, everything still exactly the same, except it no longer felt like mine. That was the part that hurt the most. Not what he did, not even the betrayal itself, but the way something that once represented my strength had been turned into something that made me feel replaced. I sat there for a few seconds, my hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing slowly, letting everything settle into one clear thought. Then I stepped back out and closed the door gently. Ryan took a step forward, his voice sharper now, more urgent. "Ashley, what are you doing?" he asked, like he still thought he could control the direction of this moment. I turned to face both of them, my expression calm, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "I am taking back what belongs to me," I said. The woman frowned slightly, her confidence finally cracking at the edges, like she was realizing that whatever version of this situation she had been told was not the full truth. Ryan shook his head, frustration rising. "You are being irrational," he said quickly. "It is just a car." And that was it. That was the moment everything became completely clear. Because to him it was just a car. Just an object. Just something he could give away without thinking twice. But to me it was never just that. I let out a small breath, almost like I was releasing something I had been holding on to for years. "No," I said quietly. "It was never just a car." I glanced at the vehicle one more time, not with attachment anymore, not with pride, but with understanding. Understanding that what it represented had already been taken long before today. Then I looked back at both of them, and for the first time, I felt completely certain about what I was about to say next. "You can keep the car," I said calmly, "because what I am walking away with is something you will never understand." Ryan stared at me, confused, like he had expected anger, expected a fight, expected something he could push back against, but not this. Not clarity. Not finality. And without waiting for a response, without looking back again, I turned and started walking away, leaving them standing there with something they thought they had taken from me, not realizing that the only thing I had truly lost was something I no longer wanted to keep. I could hear Ryan calling my name behind me, his voice louder now, sharper, no longer controlled, but I did not stop, not even for a second, because if I turned around, I knew he would try to pull me back into a conversation that no longer mattered. "Ashley, wait," he said again, faster this time, his footsteps closing the distance between us, but something inside me had already moved too far forward to go back. I kept walking until I reached my car, the one I had driven here, the one that suddenly felt more honest than anything else in my life at that moment. I opened the door, but before I got in I paused, my hand resting lightly on the frame, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel the weight of this moment completely, without rushing through it. Behind me I could feel them both standing there, the silence now different, heavier, filled with things that had not been said and probably never would be. Ryan finally reached me, slightly out of breath, his voice dropping lower again, almost like he was trying a different approach now. "You are just going to leave like this?" he asked, and there was something in his tone that sounded less like anger and more like disbelief. I turned my head slightly, not fully facing him, just enough to acknowledge that he was there. "Yes," I said simply. No long explanation. No emotion layered into it. Just the truth. He let out a frustrated breath. "You are throwing everything away over something that can be fixed," he said quickly, like he needed to believe that more than I did. I closed my eyes for a brief second, not in pain but in clarity, because that sentence told me everything I needed to know. Fixed. Like this was a small mistake. Like it had not taken time, choices, and intention to get to this point. I turned to face him fully then, meeting his eyes one last time. "It was not broken in one moment," I said quietly, "so it cannot be fixed in one either." He did not respond right away, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked unsure of what to say next. The woman stood a few feet behind him, watching quietly now, her earlier confidence gone, replaced by something more cautious, like she was finally seeing the reality of what she had stepped into. I glanced at her briefly, not with anger, not with judgment, just with a kind of distant understanding. She was not the reason this happened. She was the result of choices that had already been made. And that realization made everything feel strangely calm. I turned back to the car and slid into the driver's seat, closing the door softly behind me. For a moment I just sat there, my hands resting on the steering wheel, my breathing steady, my mind quieter than it had been all day. Outside, Ryan was still standing there, waiting like he expected me to roll the window down, to say something else, to give him one more chance to explain, but I did not. Because there was nothing left to explain. I started the engine, the sound grounding familiar, and as I pulled away, I did not look in the rearview mirror. Not because I was afraid of what I would see, but because for the first time I did not need to see it anymore. I drove for a long time without really noticing where I was going, the road stretching out in front of me like a blank space that did not ask questions and did not expect answers, and for the first time in hours my mind was not racing ahead trying to fix something that was already broken. The city moved around me in a quiet blur. Traffic lights changing from red to green, cars passing by, people walking on sidewalks living their own lives, completely unaware that mine had just shifted in a way I could never undo. I eventually pulled over near a small park about 15 miles from where everything had happened, turning off the engine and sitting there in the stillness, letting the silence settle around me. My hands rested loosely on the steering wheel, no longer tense, no longer gripping for control, just there steady, like I had finally stopped trying to hold something together that was never mine to fix in the first place. I thought about everything that had led to this moment, all the small signs I had ignored, all the times I chose comfort over truth, telling myself that things would improve, that people change, that relationships go through difficult phases. And maybe that is true, but there is a difference between difficulty and disregard, between misunderstanding and deliberate choice. What happened today was not confusion. It was clarity. Ryan did not just cross a line. He erased it quietly over time until there was nothing left to protect. And standing there earlier watching him with her, hearing the way he explained it, I realized something that felt both painful and freeing at the same time. I had been holding on to a version of him that no longer existed. Maybe it had not existed for a long time. I stepped out of the car and walked a few feet into the park, the grass soft under my shoes, the air cooler now as the sun began to lower in the sky. There were a few people nearby, a couple walking their dog, a child riding a bike, normal moments continuing without interruption, and for some reason that made everything feel more real, not less. Life does not pause for you to catch up. Keeps moving whether you are ready or not. I took a slow breath, looking up at the sky, letting the weight of everything settle into something quieter, something more manageable. I was not thinking about him anymore, not really. I was thinking about myself. About the choices I had made, the things I had accepted, the parts of me I had set aside to make something work that was never balanced to begin with. And in that moment I understood something clearly.